Okay, we are going to continue with Roman numeral 8, if you have the outline. The title is Sex and Gender from the Historical Western Civilization View. And so we're going to go over that because people may have forgotten what that view is. It is I say Western civilization because that is the biblical view. If you have some problem with me calling the traditional Western civilization view being the Christian view, you can listen to my videotape on science in the Bible and where I defend that point. But it is a traditional Western, Christian Western view of this issue. We started out by referring to Genesis chapter 1, where God's talking about making us male and female, and he keeps repeating this. And I remember I talked to you when I was a kid, I said, why does he say male and female? Everybody knows that. Well, apparently not. So anyway, the view is that we are a bi-gender species, and that we're not the same. That he looked at Adam and said, yeah, he's without a mate, and meaning he's incomplete, and then he clones with a view of genetic modification Eve, and she's meant to complete him and do things that he doesn't do. Fitting together like a jigsaw puzzle was the metaphor that I used for that. It also says that the sex drive existed because the first command was to have children, and we can say this from biology. The reason that sex is so powerful is because we have to replace the species. Before the fall, it was simply we were commanded to fill the earth, which is a big order. You need lots and lots of people for that. And then after the fall, when death came upon us, we're not supposed to die. The Bible teaches us the sex urge was probably increased, in my opinion, probably increased. I say sex makes you crazy. We talked about the fact that sex is embarrassing. The position's embarrassing. The conditions are unsanitary, and unless we had this really strong urge, we probably wouldn't do it. So that was probably increased after the fall. But the fundamental thing that we need to take away from these stories is that the reason we have a sex drive is to force us to have babies, which we wouldn't normally do. They take up our time, they suck up our money, and we have babies anyway. So that's the main reason. I think we could argue that from biology as well. There's no other reason that we can think of, an evolutionary biologist would think of, was why we would have the sex urge in the first place. The other main point that we had dealt with, just to review, is this idea of that homosexuals claim that they're born this way, and that people are then children are urged to discover who you are, practice, have all these different experiences, and discover what you like, discover who you are. And we talked about the fact that this is contrary completely to what the Bible says. The Bible says we're sinners, we're fallen, our nature's messed up, and that's not our job to discover who we are. The Bible tells us who we are. Our job is to discover what we should do and how best to live our lives. This is completely contrary to the LGBTQ theory of life and how we should live our lives. And we did a little fun verse with that. It says in Proverbs 18:2, the fool has no delight in understanding, but that his heart might discover itself. And then another verse, it says its soul might discover itself. So you discover who you are. It's a bad way to run your life. We could make an argument about that, but those are the things that we covered. And then finally, the last thing we did was I quoted from Dr. Thomas Shazaz in a book that he wrote called The Myth of Mental Illness. And he quotes, he says, most people have problems with living, not psychological problems. So trying to make this a psychological issue when actually it's just we have problems. Now, he's not saying the mental illness doesn't exist. He's simply saying that most of our problems aren't mental illnesses. In other words, I feel depressed, I'm mentally ill, I need drugs. No, your mother just died, you probably should feel bad. I feel really bad today. Yeah, well, you had a flat tire and your battery broke, so probably is a reason for it. You have to learn how to deal with things. Rather than being a mental illness, it's simply life's difficult. So I think all these things are applicable to this topic that we're talking about. Now let's go back in time and to about 3400 BC, when the Old Testament was written by Moses and the law of Moses is given. Now, the purpose of the law is debated, and I don't want to take a position because I don't want to tick anybody off, but the view that I'm going to use, it's kind of a more open view, and I'm taking this position because I can have a bigger audience when talking about the issue. Not necessarily because I agree with it, but the position I want to take while we're discussing the Old Testament is that some people say that the Old Testament was never meant to be implemented as a law. It was meant to instruct us in righteousness. And there's a number of verses that say, in fact, Christ said he didn't come to destroy the law, but that the law might be fulfilled in him. So the law, and the main argument that the law was never instituted, that it was not meant to be instituted, but it was a framework for moral thought, is bolstered by the fact that King David, committed adultery with another man's wife, got her pregnant, and then had the man put in battle to be killed so that he could claim, he could take the guy's wife. So committing murder and adultery, and then when he was approached by the prophet of God, he wasn't executed, which is what the law. So they use that to show that the law of God is a framework from thinking. It is not meant to be instituted. Now, that's the position we're going to take. I'm not sure I agree entirely with it, but it's useful for our purposes now. So let's go and look at that framework, and that's what I'll call it from now on for the purposes of this lecture. So back in Deuteronomy 22:5, remember this is written 3,400 years ago, men and women are not to wear one another's clothes. This is the first principle in Deuteronomy 22:5 that I want to deal with. And so the verse says this, English Standard Version, a woman shall not wear a man's garment, nor shall a man put on a woman's cloak, for whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord your God. This is called today, I never could understand this. I have no such urges that I ever recall having, that to put on, to dress like a woman. However, apparently there are some people who have very strong compunctions in this direction, and it in the past has been designated a mental illness. But here in the scriptures, this has been something that apparently occurred rather frequently, or at least enough to be noticed, because back that long ago it was forbidden. A woman shall not wear a man's garment, nor shall a man put on a woman's cloak. So whenever I see military women dressed in men's fatigues with a man's hat, wearing men's boots, I think was a supply, or you see people on television, a woman with her hair bobbed short like a man, wearing a man's collared shirt and a blazer. Or in the case of a cartoon I just saw the other day at my grandchildren's, they had all these cartoons running around, and they had a police officer who was bald like a man but had red lipstick and earrings and was wearing a suit like an FBI agent, this sort of thing. So these things are all apparently things that are not to be done. So let me repeat the first principle. A woman shall not wear a man's garment, neither shall a man put on a woman's cloak, for whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord your God. So you need to be the gender you are. That's basically what it says, and stop thinking about these other issues. The second one is homosexual behavior is not acceptable, and it does not ask how you feel about it. So let me read Leviticus 18:22. This is also found in Romans 1:26-27, 1 Corinthians 6:16. You can rewind to get those off. But the Leviticus 18:22 says, "You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination." Again, an abomination. A very, very serious crime. It doesn't say you can't love a man, that you can't have urges toward a man. It doesn't talk anything about your or woman. It doesn't say anything about what you think, what you feel. It says you shall not lie with them, with a man as with a woman. And so it's describing a behavior. It's not something you are, it is something you do that's being condemned here. Important distinction. The third concept is adultery is not acceptable. In other words, you're only to have sex with your wife or your husband if you're a female And it does, again, it doesn't ask how you feel. It doesn't ask who you are in love with. It doesn't say you have to be in love to have sex with your mate. It simply says well, here we go. Hebrews 13:4. Let marriage be held in honor among all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled. For God will judge the sexually immoral and the adulterous. There are other verses, Exodus 20:14, thou shalt not commit adultery, Deuteronomy 5:18, which is another Old Testament, and then 1 Corinthians 6:9-11. All of them say basically you need to be married to someone that you have sex with, and you're to have one wife, basically is what it says. That's another issue which could be elaborated on, but we'll move on from there. Another one is you shall not lie with the beast. This is bestiality. We call bestiality typically Leviticus 20:15 and following. Leviticus 20:15 says, if a man lie with the beast, he shall surely be put to death, and ye shall slay the beast. And then in 16, and if a woman approach unto any beast and lie down thereto, thou shalt kill the woman and the beast. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. So again, an abomination is as bad as putting to death. That's basically what it means, separation from God. And this is forbidden. So LGBTQ plus, does that include that? Well, I don't know. I'm asking. Then fornication, which is a type of adultery. Actually, it's, probably, I guess we could say that. Maybe adultery is a type of fornication. And this is speaking of the tokens of virginity. Deuteronomy 22:20-21. If the tokens of virginity be not found, the damsel bring to the door of her house, and the men of the city shall stone her with stones, so shall you put evil away from among you. And this is a practice that non-Jews did, and women were expected to prove after the marriage bed had been had by the man, they were to prove that they were still a virgin. And again, that's another very big topic, and we could spend hours talking about it, but we'll move on from there. The point is that it was very important that women be virgins and men be virgins when they go to have the wedding bed. This was very, very important. The pagans had very similar rules because parentage was at issue, and the man didn't want to raise somebody else's kids. But in the Bible, it's more of a spiritual thing, I believe. And then the other one is rape. Deuteronomy 22:25 and following says this, but if a man find a betrothed, it's an engaged damsel, in the field, and the man force her and lie with her, then only the man shall lie with her. Then only the man that lie with her shall die, because she cried out and no one heard her. So this principle goes something like this. If you're being raped and you're a female and you don't resist, then we call it adultery. If you're being raped and you resist and you call out, and you resist the raper, then it's rape, and the man should be executed. Again, he's in this particular verse, he's violating someone's marriage arrangement. It says she's betrothed to the man, and when you violate that man's wife, then you're to be killed. Again, very serious offense. And then another one is incest, and this is a very interesting one, particularly if you know pagan history, Roman and Greek history. It says here, do not approach any close relative to have sexual relations. I am the Lord your God. And it goes on to make a list. It goes on for a couple chapters, I think, at least a chapter or two, defining who we mean by close relations. And it mentions aunts, spouses of people you're closely related to, your sister, your half-sister. It goes and makes an extended list of people you're not allowed to have sexual relations with. Again, not again, but the principle there, I think, is that people need to feel safe when they're at home, and that sex, because it's a very powerful emotion, can often cause many, many problems, particularly when people are close together. So some types are simply not allowed at all. So anyway, all of these kinds of things are very, very common activities. And then what we say here is, let me kind of relate this to history, because I think history can teach us something here. There's an atheist who's written a number of books. I don't want to say that I have his quote, but anyway, he's an atheist and he's an historian, primarily a historian. He's one of the main atheist guys that is out on the circuit. And he made an interesting observation. I didn't bring his quote with me here, but I have it. And basically he said he was studying the ancients and he realized that he wouldn't like these people. And he mentions why. First of all, rape was, he doesn't say it this way, but I just know this from studying. Rape was not illegal in pagan Rome. Slavery, of course, was common, and in ancient Rome, slaves were not like slaves in more modern times. If you were a slave, you basically did whatever your master told you. He could use you for sexual pleasure. He could have you killed, and all these things are written in Roman law. The Greeks were the same way. You had a wife, but the wife would be kept. If you're wealthy, wife would be kept with her family so she didn't get pregnant by somebody else, less likely, and then you would just go to her. If you're a Spartan, all Greeks didn't do the same thing. If you're a Spartan, you would be required to have babies by her, otherwise you lived with men and you would have sex with men. It wasn't because you were homosexual or you were gay, but it was because sex feels good and there's a drive, and so you decide how you're going to meet it. That's the way the Greeks looked at it. Romans very, very similarly. Romans were not so much concerned with you having sex with a dude as to which one of you was on the bottom, which of you took the feminine position, because the Romans were all about macho, and so they would be embarrassed not because they had sex with a man, but because they were on the bottom and the other guy was the dominant male. In one Roman, to give you an idea of this, one Roman law document that we have, this wealthy Roman had 200 slaves, something like 200 slaves, and he was having an affair with two of the male slaves, and one of them got jealous of the other male slave and killed the master. And in Roman law, then all 200 slaves were killed. That was Roman law. All 200 slaves were killed. And when students asked about this law, they asked, why does this law exist? And the answer from the teachers of the Roman law was that, the idea here is you have a master and he has 200 slaves. Well, he's vastly outnumbered, and so he needs legal protection to keep. And he can kill them, he can beat them, he can sell them, he has complete mastery over them, that the master needs some kind of protection since he's outnumbered. And so so the idea was that if any of these 200 heard anything at all about murdering the master or doing something to the master, knowing that they would all be killed, this would motivate them more likely to say something so that they could stop the damage to the master. Anyway, this is a case law from Rome. So anyway, back to the atheist guy, he said he realized that people were just chattel to be used by the powerful, that the weak had no protection. They could have their children killed, and theoretically they could have their wives killed if they didn't like it. Now, they very seldom killed their wives, because particularly if their wives were the daughters of important men, because they might piss off their father, not because it was wrong to kill people. Anyway, they had sex with anything they wanted to. And this brings up a couple of points with regard to the word gay. What they're trying to do is they're trying to make you think that I may be jumping ahead here. Okay, let me try to lay this out so it's clear. So you have I'm harking back now. I'm trying to pull in the use of the word gay, and the whole point of this section is homosexuality, I don't want to use the word gay, is homosexuality something you are, or is it something you do? Is it something you are, or is it something you do? Are you born that way, or is it merely an action? And so far you see that the scriptures treat this as an action. They do not ask anything else about it. They don't make any statements about it. They simply treat it as an action. So the purpose of the use of the word gay, and even selecting it for this purpose, is to make you think that gay is a type of person. And so we have, if you discriminate against gay people, that you're discriminating against a kind of person, like a black person or a woman. You're discriminating against a kind of person. The Bible doesn't see it that way. It's an action. And I think history demonstrates that the Bible's approach to it is more correct. So let me explain how this works out in the public arena, trying to convince people by manipulating words. So you have a young boy who likes basketball, and he has a favorite basketball guy he likes, and he's got his poster up on his wall, and he dreams about hanging out with the basketball superstar. And the purpose of this movement is to get the boy to think, well, maybe you're gay because you like this man and you dream about him. Or you two guys really like each other. They spend time playing ball together, they hang out together, and then the guy says, hey, you like this guy pretty much, maybe you're gay. There was even a movie that the Monkees did way back when they were out on the thing. They had this kid who had a dream that he was hanging out with the Monkees, and they were holding him up and they were singing to him and all this kind of stuff. And the idea is that maybe you're gay. And then you have this story of David and Jonathan in the Bible. They held each other, kissed each other, they sang songs to each other, and David made poems to Jonathan. Jonathan gave up his life for David. They said, well, maybe these guys were gay. So all of these things are used to convince people that you're actually a homosexual. So now, where do we go with this? When people's minds are all thinking this, but the Bible doesn't present it that way. This is basically, because I'm running out of time, this is basically the presentation of the Bible. Sex feels good. It feels really, really good. And it feels good whether you do it yourself, whether you do it with somebody else, whether you do it with an animal, whatever you do. And people clearly have preferences to things, like they prefer steak to hamburger or whatever. They clearly have preferences, but sex just feels good. And depending on many, many other factors, because your mind is fluid, you may think you like this or you like that based on your own your fluidity of your experience. But in fact, the sex drive exists, it's always there, and the real question is not what you are. The real question is, how should you satisfy that sex urge, which is one of the most powerful urges that we have. And that's basically the way the Bible looks at it. And it does it because it talks about the act. It doesn't talk about feelings or orientation. It doesn't do that. It doesn't look at it that way. And the Romans didn't look at it that way, and the Greeks didn't look at it that way. The idea that you're oriented towards something is a modern invention, it appears. And so that would be a more biblical way to look at it. And our time is up, so we will return a little later, kind of maybe feather that out a little bit more later.